All right, we have got a brief pause from Acts for this week, and I think a couple of weeks' time. Our focus for this next couple of months in our Radical Simple Discipleship series is work and rest. So it's something that's going to touch on every single one of us, and it's something that matters in a culture where way too many of us define ourselves by what we do, or what we wish we could do, or our inability to work, or by how much we earn. And so for you, if you're stuck in a job that you hate, or that you're not satisfied with, or you're overworked, or you're burning out, or if you can't find work, or you're not well enough to work mentally or physically, and it's keeping you from being able to, if your work is caring for others, or if you can't sleep because you're stressed out, or if you've got no motivation, or you're work shy, or you can't focus, or you waste all your time, this is for you. And I think most of us will find ourselves in there somewhere. Radical Simple Discipleship is a series looking at, very simply, what does the Bible say about key things that all of us have to face up to? And then, what are those things, where do they cut against our culture? In what ways are they radical for us? What does God have to teach us about work and rest? So some of the key things that we're going to be saying are that we are all made to work, but that it's not our work that defines us, that we weren't made only to work, we also need appropriate rest and refreshment, and that it's found most of all in God. That you don't need to be famous to be satisfied. You don't need to earn like huge piles of money, have loads of stuff to be satisfied. In fact, that you can find some satisfaction in whatever God gives you to do, even if it feels rubbish, if you get the right attitude and if you're properly relating to God in the middle of it. And that there can even be like eternal significance and satisfaction to the things that we put our hands to. So, up front, when we say work, I'm really talking about any kind of fruitful labor. So some of you, it's like your work also fills up your tank. It might be that you go into work on a Monday kind of buzzing and like you love what you do. It might be that you go into work on a Monday dreading it. And all of your work is kind of, I do it because I have to. I need to put food on the table, but I hate this job. I would much rather not be doing this. Some of you might be like, I'd much rather not be doing any kind of work. I just want to rest all the time. But we're talking about any kind of fruitful labor. So it might fill your tank up a bit, but it will always take something out of you. It will always tire you out in some way as well. It could be any job. I'm not just talking about paid employment. Any kind of job, whether you're emptying the bins or whether you're top of a company, whether you're an artist or a construction worker or whatever it might be. But I'm also, it includes people who are raising children, people who are caring for their grandchildren, people who are caring for family members, people who are volunteering, people who are serving in all kinds of unpaid ways as well. So this touches all of us. Rest, when we say rest, I'm talking about really not working. We are giving our body, our mind, our soul time to recover, time to find refreshment so that we can go on fruitfully working. So it does us good so that we can go on fruitfully working. And this it's got to include a healthy amount of sleep. So if that's missing, there's something wrong there. It's kind of a warning sign. But most of all, our truest rest is found in God. So that's what we're going to have a look at. And this takes a bit of discernment because it's not cut and paste for each person. For some of you, reading a book is rest. You love it. For some of you, reading a book is work. You would not choose to do that in your spare time. We believe that we're made to work and we're made to rest. And if either of those is missing, you will suffer for it. If either of those is out of balance, you will suffer for it. So why do we believe that? We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 1. I'm dotting around a bit today, so hopefully you can keep up with the Bible verses. But starting in Genesis chapter 1, I'll be reading from the New International Version throughout. And we see in Genesis chapter 1, God working, God the first worker. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And there's this pattern of 6 days, on each day, God is working. He's creating things. And is there any mention of God being frustrated in his work? No. Everything he says, it happens beautifully, perfectly. At the end of each day, he's created different things. He looks out and he says, it's good. It's good. So God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. There's this pattern. He's working. It's fruitful. It's satisfying. It's good. And you come to the end of the at the end of the 6th day. Chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array, the greatest creative work that's ever been done. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And then we go on and see that not only does God work and rest, even though, does he need to? But he does. Not only does he work and rest, but when he creates mankind, we're created in God's image. So back in chapter 1, God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals and all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So we're made in his image, so you would expect something of what he's like to be like us. If God at least sets the example of working and resting, then it's a pattern that we're led to follow, to work and to rest. He instructs us. He gives Adam and Eve, these first humans, as a pattern for all humanity, this instruction to be fruitful, to use their time fruitfully. And we see them begin to do that, Adam naming the animals and different things, and this encouragement there to use their time well. And then there's a measure of rest in that as well. You get the sense in Eden, in this garden paradise, that work and rest are like beautifully in line with each other. So work is fruitful, there's no frustration, and rest is perfect. You get the sense of them walking with God in the cool of the day. It's like this, just the beauty of being able to stop and stroll with God and talk about things and enjoy his company. We're made to work and made to rest. He's made us for that. There's no Sabbath rule that's been brought in yet. That will come in later. At the time being, it's like it just works out naturally, it seems, the wisdom that he's given them, the way they live. But things go wrong. From that delight, we come to the fall, where the people decide that we can't really trust that God had had our best interests at heart when he told us not to do this one thing, to eat from this one tree. Maybe it would be better if we tried doing things our own way, and from there things spiral. And so they go against what God had commanded them. And God's response to that is he's to throw them out of the garden, because sin's entered in and polluted this relationship. And part of their being cast out of the garden is this curse that goes with it. There's several curses, but one of them is this. Chapter 3, Genesis, verse 17. To Adam he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you'll return. So in the fall, work becomes painful toil. Thorns and thistles come into the picture, and sweat and all the unpleasantness of work that we might recognize. Work is not in itself a bad thing. Work is a good thing. If work is painful, if work hurts, if work feels bad, it's because of sin. So some examples. If you're a farmer, very literally the thorns and the thistles that the ground produces are, Genesis says, a consequence of sin, part of being in a world that's broken by sin. So you're trying to do your farming, and there's thorns and thistles that you're having to clear out, and there's all the ways that nature itself is like fighting against you as you're trying to do your work. So there's pests that are coming in, and you're dealing with green fly and slugs and things. The gardeners will know these problems, and sometimes there's diseases that affect the crops, and sometimes there's famine and a drought and things where the rain doesn't fall, and or there's no sunlight for ages if you live in this country, and nature's against you. And you get the impression back in Eden, this was never a problem. Just, you throw some seeds down, and like the corn on the cob bursts up, and it's good, and there's no frustration. And there's a sense of like, that's where things were headed, if not for sin. And that's where things are headed at the return of Jesus. That there's going to be a making new of all things, and a redeeming of work, and a restoration of satisfaction and joy in work and in rest. But it's not where we are now. So now we've not only got nature is fighting against us, but all the other effects of sin. So like your son who you'd been raising to take on the farm after you goes to work for your rival. Or your business partner steals from you. Or like the greed and the selfishness of people means that thieves come onto your land and steal stuff, or vandals wreck your tractor, or people are fixing prices, and in all kinds of ways things are conspiring against you because of sin. And then, as if that's not bad enough, your own sinful desires start to cause trouble. So, your farm might be doing just fine, but you can't be satisfied because your neighbor's farm's doing better. Or maybe it could be producing enough, but actually it doesn't quite fund the kind of lifestyle that you're grasping for. And so sin enters in and makes things painful in all kinds of ways. And I'm sure that you can think of ways in which that applies to you. Whether you're looking after your grandchildren, whether you're working in a school, whether you're working for a boss who's a bit rubbish, or whether you're trying to run your own business or any kind of thing, the work that God's put in front of you, and you can see the way that the thorns and the thistles have come up in it and made it tough. And not only that, but rest is made harder by sin. So we struggle with work and we struggle with rest. It might be that your home life isn't peaceful, so you can't rest because you don't feel safe. It might be that everyone's at odds, so there's never a sense of like peace in the home. It's too chaotic. It might be that your heart is too busy chasing after the wrong things, spoiling any chance you might have had at rest. So maybe you're so focused on working more to earn what you feel like you need to earn that you can't stop. Or you've got such a sense of, well, my work is what defines me. So if my job is taken away from me, or if I don't succeed in it, then I'm going to fail, or I'm going to die. And then you can't stop. You can't rest properly because work is the defining thing in your life. Or you've been fooled into the wrong kind of rest in overindulgence or laziness or selfishness, or thinking that like Netflix or chocolate could restore your soul. I know what you're thinking. Chocolate may play some part in restoring your soul, but it cannot do the whole job. We're meant to know a balance of fruitful work and genuine rest, and sin messes everything up. What are we going to do? We're going to start with some wisdom from the Proverbs. Proverbs, if you're familiar with it, a book full of short, sharp sentences that minces no words. We'll begin with Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. Those who work their land will have abundant food. Those who chase fantasies have no sense. Proverbs 14, verse 23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Proverbs 15, verse 16. Better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Over to Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Don't trust your own cleverness. Cast but a glance at riches, and they're gone. They will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. And then last, Proverbs 26, from verse 13. A sluggard says, "There's a lion in the street, a fierce lion roaming the roads. I can't go out and work." As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on their bed. And my favorite, a sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. These, they're punchy, and we see the sense in them, don't we, as we hear them read? They're saying, don't be lazy. It won't satisfy you in the short term. It won't satisfy you in the long term. When it's time to work, work hard, work diligently, work fruitfully. Don't chase after riches. They're unpredictable. Let your drive be please God. Be satisfied with enough. And then when you're content with what you really need, you'll be able to rest in peace. Don't chase fantasies. Get on with what's in front of you. Get on with what God's given you to do. There might be times that there's dreams and things that he's put. We'll come back to that later, but get on with what God's put in front of you. Do it well. And if you want kind of radical, simple, well, there you go. And yet Proverbs, I think most of us will have experienced. There's great wisdom in these words, but they don't always hold true. It can be that you can, for a farmer, work the land, but if there's a drought, you're stuck. We need a bit more than just the wisdom of Proverbs. So we're going to go on. We're going to take a look at the wisdom of the Sabbath. And through in Exodus chapter 20, when God's people were in the wilderness on their way out of Egypt, on the way to the promised land, he gives them 10 famous rules known as the 10 Commandments. The fourth one is this: remember the Sabbath day. You remember that from Genesis, that day that God had called holy, the day that God rested on? Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Again, like the Proverbs, it stresses the importance of work. 6 days you shall labor. Many of us will hear that and think, oh, hold on. 5 days you shall labor. I need 2 days at the weekend. I need 2 days of total vegetation. Some of us are like, I need 7 days of total vegetation. The Sabbath says, no, 6 days you shall labor. There's work to do. Do it fruitfully. Not all of that's going to be in paid employment, but there's things to do. But then there's a challenge to those of us who can't stop. The week's full, the weekend's full. The Sabbath says you've got to stop at some point. You must rest. There's this strict importance of it. Shortly after this rule's introduced, they find a guy who's out collecting firewood on the Sabbath. What do we do? Because is he breaking the rules? Is he not? What are the consequences? The consequences are they put him to death. And what God is underlining there is the absolute seriousness of our need to rest. The deadly effects of overwork and not being willing to rest. And in resting, there's this understanding of humility. When we rest, we're saying, I can't do everything. We're saying, however hard I work, I will never be able to meet every possible need, cover every possible eventuality. Resting is humility. It's saying, I trust God to do what only God can do. Only he doesn't need to stop. Only he doesn't need to sleep. And it's looking to him for all that we can't do. And so what's left for the people when they can't work? Well, it's time to gather. It's time to spend time with God, to worship and to study what he's like, to get to know him. Time to worship him together. Time to sacrifice, to forcibly stop and find true rest in God himself. As they rest there, they're reading the word. They're reminding themselves, this is what God's done. This is what God's like. Their souls are restored as they're reminded to look to him, reminded of what only God can do. And we keep seeing it all the way through the Bible, that it's only in God that true rest is found. So Psalm 23. Who is it that finds true rest in Psalm 23? It's the sheep who are led by the shepherd. It's those who are walking closely with him. It's the ones that he leads by still waters and green pastures. It's the ones who know him close. When it comes to Isaiah 40, we were hearing about that last week. Who is it that finds their strength renewed? It's those who wait upon the Lord. Throughout the Bible, we see that it's the people who turn to God to meet their needs who find the truest rest and refreshment. So whether it's Esther, who's looking to God in the middle of like major national crisis, but she's trusting him. She's throwing her hopes on him. She's able to find some peace in that. Whether it's Paul and Silas, they're chucked in prison. They don't know if their lives are going to be forfeit. What are they doing? They're singing. Because they found rest in God. They're at peace with him because of who they know him to be. Whether it's Daniel, who has just the best night's sleep in a lion's den. Wakes up in the morning, there's these beasts all around him, but God has kept him safe. And then who is it that finds the most fruitful work? It's the people who look to God for what they should be doing and who get on with what he's put in front of them. 6 days to work, make the most of them, whether it's Joshua called to be a military leader, whether it's Boaz, who's like a farmer working with contentment. He's not taking too much. He's leaving enough for others. Whether it's Rahab, who turns from a job and a nation that totally dishonor God and submits herself to him. And this is not to say that doing what God asks of you is always going to be like the most immediately joyful and happy thing you could ask for. I mean, you don't have to look too far in the Bible. Ask Jeremiah, ask Ezekiel. Here are two men who they confidently did what God had asked them to do. Man, their lives were uncomfortable. There was serious pain and suffering that God asks them to walk through. In the short run, often not a lot of happiness, but great eternal satisfaction, great fruitfulness in God's sight, great pleasing of God. There might be some who just need to be taught that work and rest are good. There might be some who will be helped by having good examples to look to. Often, lots of us kind of know the theory and know the examples, and we still fall short. We still struggle with work and rest. Let's look at a better example. So let's see what Jesus models. Jesus models work and rest. So did Jesus have a well-paid job? No. Did his work have value? Yeah, the greatest value. How much money did Jesus leave behind when he died? None that we know of. Was his life well spent? Yeah. Did the work that he did please God? Yeah. How did he make sure that was happening? He spent time praying. He spent time with God. He spent time with his Father, took time out from the work he was doing to keep saying, God, I want to honor you. I want to go your way. I want to please you. I want to do the work that you put before me and do it well. He models for us this kind of not just asking God for what we need, but the joy and the privilege of knowing God. This is what Darren was talking about earlier in the kind of what we were singing and our response to it. There's a knowing of God. It's like I could tell my children that there's a guy in town who they can go to and he'll give them food and drink and stuff when they need it and clothes when they need it. And they might sort of think, well, okay, I'll believe you and I could go and ask him maybe, but they know me. They know they can come to me. They know they can trust me to do my best to put food for them and clothes for them and a place to shelter. But what a difference that knowing someone makes, knowing that they have your best interests at heart. And what Jesus models is that we can know God. And not just in asking God for the stuff that we need or the peace that we need, but it's in knowing God that we find those things. That peace comes from knowing him. Knowing how he cares for us, knowing what he's like. So he's able to rest. He's able to sleep in the middle of a storm. He's the only one on the boat that's fast asleep when everyone else is panicking. Jesus can rest. He's often stopping to eat. There's so many meals in the New Testament that Jesus takes time for. He's often on the move, teaching, praying, healing. And you see, when he heals people, often it's so that they can be restored to fruitful work. People who are crippled, lame, oppressed in all kinds of ways, and Jesus restores them to health so they can be fruitful again. Or he restores them to health so that they can rejoin the rest of the gathered people who are outcasts, people who are set apart in some ways, and he heals them so they can join back in Sabbath and festivals and celebration and finding rest in God. And sometimes Jesus' work is satisfying. Like, you imagine seeing Matthew leave the tax booth and coming and following him, the joy in Jesus' heart as he sees that obedience. You imagine the joy of seeing the woman at the well rejoicing and going to tell all the people in town. You imagine seeing the parents of that child who was raised to life, their joy and the satisfaction in that moment. And sometimes Jesus' work is frustrating. Like, he heals 10 lepers. One of them comes back to give thanks to God. Frustrating in some ways, isn't it? When he sees the response of the Jewish leaders at times, frustrating. Sometimes Jesus' work is awful, like when he was whipped and beaten, and when a crown of thorns was put on his head, and when he was hung on a cross to die. Even in the awfulness, he's able to follow God and find meaning in that because he's doing what God has put before him, and because he's looking to the joy that's set before him as well. He knew it was the work that God had given him, even if it was rough. And when his work was going to be rough, what does he do? He prays. The Garden of Gethsemane, he prays. He does ask God, any other way, I'll take it, but not my will, but yours be done. And what he asks his friends to pray with him too. They don't do a great job, but he asks his friend to pray with him too. It's not only Jesus' example that helps us, most of all, but his death and his resurrection and the power of the Spirit. His death and resurrection that broke the power of sin, that sets us free from the power of sin over us, that causes us to desire more and more what we ought to desire, that gives us the strength to turn from sinful desires. Because of love that blossoms in us for the one who saved us, that more and more we get to know him. And as we get to know him and as we learn what he's like and what he's done and who he is, that love in us for him grows and grows. And our desire is, I want to please him. I want to please him in the way that I respond, in the way that I live, in the way that I work, in the way that I rest. That desire to do what we ought to desire grows in us as we know him through the power that he's made available. And this obedient submission in us as well, that sometimes I don't yet fully desire what I ought to desire, and yet he's Lord, and I'm going to choose to do it anyway. Because that's what he deserves. Worthy of it all. That's what we sang. Worthy of it all. And so we're baptized in water as we put our faith in Jesus. We're filled with the Spirit, and the Spirit, not merely the power of God, but God himself, so that we can know him, so that he can come and be with us, and we can have him with us at all times to help us and to strengthen us. And the Spirit then gives us that power for fruitful living. John chapter 15, Jesus speaks about how we stay fruitful. He says, remain in me. Jesus speaking to his disciples, remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. There's this encouragement. Keep coming back to Jesus as the Spirit helps us to know him, to know God, to understand the word. Keep coming back to Jesus, and the Spirit strengthens us to be fruitful. And in coming to God through the Spirit, we find rest as well. We find ourselves able to rest. And so we find increasingly that we go out into the world and we find that what's the work that God's put before us? Well, we're asking him and we're hoping that he'll lead us in those things. And the thorns and thistles are still there, in this age at least. The thorns and thistles and all the pain and the frustrations of your work, the belligerent colleagues or employees, or the boss that just doesn't get it, or the frustrating work conditions, or all the stuff that's, the thorns and thistles are still there. We still feel the effects of sin, but sin itself no longer has any power over us. So that in the face of all those thorns and thistles, your response to those things can change. Your heart, as you respond to those things, can change. The way that you live, the way that you obey God, it changes. He gives us the power, the ability to live differently in a way that we had no power to before. We keep coming to him and asking for that. Keep changing this in me as we respond to those things at work or in our family, the work that God's put before us. Like, what's making me angry in this? What's causing frustration in me in this? What's causing bitterness? What's causing jealousy? And Lord, some of it I can't deal with, but Lord, the things that are rising up in me, Lord, deal with them. Help me, Lord. And so, through the presence and the power of God, we're able to change. And Jesus and the Spirit allow us to put all those proverbs and all that wisdom of the Sabbath into practice. So that when it comes to say, don't be lazy. Don't be lazy, be diligent. Put your hand to work. Do the work that God's put before you. Well, then in Colossians 3, we have Paul speaking to the church and speaking to us, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So whether you're raising children, whether you're cleaning a home, whether you're volunteering in some way, whether you're employed by the church or the council or some company or whatever it is, Paul says, God says to us, it's the Lord Christ you're serving. And knowing that it's the Lord Christ you're serving, do it well. And there's both that instruction and the submission that we owe him, and then also that desire that rises up in us. He's so good. I want to do this well for him. The strength that he gives us in that. There's, as we're told, don't chase after riches because they're unpredictable. They'll fly away at a moment. And Jesus says the same. Don't store up treasures on earth. They're just going to mold away. Store up treasures in heaven. And the Colossians says the same thing in this one just now. When you're working as if you're working for the Lord, you'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. And sometimes the Bible speaks about reward, and it's just in terms of like riches and treasures of like, oh, I like those. And sometimes it's speaking about responsibilities in the age to come. Sometimes it's speaking about authority in the age to come. It's speaking about fruitful work that God gives us to do in the age to come as we honor him now. And there's a way in which, as you follow Christ now, and as you look to follow his example in your workplace, however rubbish it might be at times, as you follow his example and act more and more like him in response to things, in the way that you treat people and deal with things, he is both rewarding you in the age to come. He is preparing you to be the kind of person who is fit to work in the age to come. He's teaching you to be, in the course of this life, someone who is fitted for heaven. And it's a beautiful witness to what God can do in the life of someone, that there's one person who doesn't grouse and complain and gossip in the office, and the difference is that they love Jesus. And then when he tells us, that you don't need to worry about all the stuff that everyone else chases after, but instead let your drive be to please God, and that he will give you somewhere to sleep and clothes to wear and food to eat. You don't need to worry. Everyone else chases after all these things, but your Father in heaven knows that you need them, and he'll give them to you. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Do the work he puts before you. He so honors it. I want to encourage you in it. This is where true work and rest are found. This is where, even when all your work is stripped away from you, you can still find meaning and belonging. There are some of us who may now or may in the future, our health may make it that we can no longer do the work that we always felt was our calling. And yet in Christ, you could spend all your time, all I can do is pray. And God honors it. If that's what he's given you to do, if that's all he's allowed you to do for a season, he honors it. There are some of us who, through dementia or other terrible diseases, might be able to do seemingly nothing. And yet that person doesn't lose their sense of humanity because of that, because they are made in the image of God. And because this life is but a breath. And there's fruitful labor that God has for them in the age to come. I look forward to seeing, I think conversations with Leon about, and hi if you're watching, but about like artistic things and things that he used to put his hand to that he just physically can't anymore. And yet I look forward to creative endeavors with him in the heavens and earth made new. And with many others, seeing architectural prowess brought to bear again, seeing people's culinary skills brought to bear again, different things that come to life again when all things are made new by Jesus. He's coming back. That's what we're looking forward to. And in part, our response to all of this is to turn to God. Is to read and to pray and to know him. These aren't just obligations. These are ways that we grow to know him better in reading what he's like, in speaking to him and hearing his voice. Part of our response is to turn to him in that way, find rest for our souls, find strength for all that we need, find wisdom. But part of the response also must be that we talk and pray about these things together. That if you're in discipleship partners, then please talk about these things with those you're with or friends in the church. Get into a discipleship group, sign up today. Don't miss the opportunity, but have people around you that you can speak to. Speak to people who are older than you in the church, who've got a bit more experience, who are wiser than you. Ask them for their insight. It might be that the work you're doing is really tough. And your request is like, my work is tough, will you pray for me? But you might not see a whole lot of stuff. It might be that your boss is rubbish. It might be that your heart attitude is really bad. It might be that you're actually in the wrong job. And maybe you've been chasing the wrong things, or you just took a wrong step at some point, and God would say, no, I want you somewhere else. It might be that work is really tough, and God's instruction to you is, I know it's really tough. I've got you there for a purpose, and I want you to stay there because it honors me. And I know there's stories in this room of people who've slogged that out, and sometimes there's been a reprieve at some point. God's brought something after time of faithfulness. Some of you are still in it. You need friends around you who can pray for you, who can help you find that strength in God to endure and to honor him in the middle of it. We want to be able to pray with the faith that God is able to do all things, that he does work all things for the benefit of those who love him. That he does care for you, that he does have the very best interests of his people at heart. We want to pray with that kind of faith. He's able to do these things and that he cares for you, and also with the humility that says, if he asks me to do something I'd rather not do, I'm still going to do it. And I'll keep praying. It might be that you see a friend who's just wrecking themselves, working with the wrong kind of reasons or not resting, and they need your encouragement or a sharp word from a friend to say, stop it. Might be that you're doing something that you really have no choice over. It might be that you're caring for family or relatives, and it's not like you can just drop it. But you need wisdom from friends, and you need all the support that the church family can give, and we want to hear from God and learn how we can do that well together. It might be that you're doing one job and you've got a sense of calling into something else, and you need friends around you who can help you pray into that. Many of us live with a sense of, I'm doing one thing, but I really feel there's something from God that I'm not there yet, but he's leading me there, and how am I going to? And it might be that that's around the corner, and there's friends who will pray with you and help you come to the now's the moment decision. It might be that it's 20 years down the line, and some of you have been through that wait. Some of you are still in it. And friends who will pray with you and say, God, we're going to keep working faithfully. We're going to keep finding rest in you in the middle of that, and trust that you will work all things together for the good. Maybe you're just lazy. Maybe you really struggle with getting on and doing some work. Maybe you struggle with distraction or being able to focus, and you just need to talk to some people about it. Open up about it. Be honest. It's embarrassing. I've struggled with this to different degrees. It's embarrassing to talk about it. We need it. We need the encouragement, the help, the prayers of our friends. I'm not going to go on longer. I want to pray for us. Well, perhaps we could pray together, and then we're going to take communion. So I feel the Lord's Prayer would be an appropriate way to respond. This is really for those who follow Jesus or who want to follow him. I'll read out a line at a time, and you can pray after me. Why don't you stand if you'd like to? Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. On earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. And forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I've gone long. We're probably getting towards the time where we want to collect kids. So we're going to go into communion, and then we'll have a think about where we go from there. But Jesus, communion, this is this way of remembering what he did for us, taking bread, taking drink, remembering his body broken, his blood poured out, and just recalling that we look at the curse back in Genesis, and what's the curse on the ground because of sin? Thorns that come out. And when Jesus went to the cross, a crown of thorns was put on his head, so that in his death and in his resurrection, he could redeem work for us, and he could redeem us for work. So why don't we go and give thanks and remember what he did for us. God bless you.